2 red lights in front, and one of them, like I said, just back up. We're here with Aislynn Campbell at Coffee Waves, and it is August 10th, 2017, CE or Anno Domini, depending on your notation as well. And Ms. Campbell is the Executive Director of Grow Local South Texas, which does the local farmers market here in the Corpus Christi area. It does the Tom Graham Learning Garden, and a variety of outreach programs.
Yep. We're an education and advocacy nonprofit for local food production, basically.
Okay.
And really, how I got into this was just kind of I had a desire to have something that wasn't available in my community, and I simply often just say healthy lifestyle. It just wasn't available. All kinds of things, active lifestyle, good foods that I wanted to eat, that kind of thing. And so I kind of just accidentally stepped into it. But the truth is that what I learned is that I had a desire to help create a healthy community. And who doesn't eat food? And being brought up, in the southern part of Texas, being brought up Christian, I learned that how do we get people together? We can have some food and have a talk about all kinds of things. Well, then I figured out how awesome gardening was and how that gave us the ability to have some community interaction. And so it just kind of all fell into place. And so I have the opportunity now to work as a healthy community advocate and outreach and education through some means that we worked as a community to create together, the farmers market and this community teaching garden.
Cool. So, how did the nonprofit self-develop? You start with an interest in I'm doing this, and other people in the community are doing this, and this is something that we need. How does that move to the more formal structure of a nonprofit agency with budgets and outreach and fundraising and all that stuff?
Well, I had a desire I had started kind of growing some of my own food and knew that there wasn't access to things I required. And so I said, okay, let's start a farmer's market. Well, I stepped into starting a farmer's market kind of like probably most people do, and going, oh yeah, I can do this. This is no big deal. I'll go out and I'll meet some farmers and we'll get a market started, and then it'll be no big deal, right? But what I learned within the first 3 months of running a farmer's market was that we didn't have any food farmers in this community. We didn't have policy leaders in this community that understood what a farmer's market even was. And we also, I learned that the news media, folks like that, had a strong interest in this, and so good or bad, we needed to make a decision about how we were going to handle all of that stuff, because sometimes the stuff that the news was looking at wasn't necessarily good for the farmers market industry or the local food industry. And so after a year, when we first started hosting the farmers market, and you go, oh my gosh, I just committed to every Wednesday for the rest of my life, it feels like. So you go, okay, well, let me gather some other people. Well, I'm going to need some vendors that are farmers. I'm going to need some vendors that are not farmers, because we have other types of vendors at the farmers market. I'm going to need some community members, because I'm going to want their advice on how they would want a farmers market in their community. And so we created that little committee. Well, that committee learned there was all kinds of legal issues we were going to have to deal with, and so to run a farmers market is almost impossible without some sort of association. Even if you don't go nonprofit, it's almost impossible to do that without a core group of people, either starting and running an LLC or So as we got around the year and we had this committee and we started thinking we needed to do more than just run a farmer's market, education advocacy was required. We had lots of people that would say things, hey, you should write a grant. Hey, there's lots of grants out there. You should write a grant. But we didn't qualify to write a grant. And so I said, okay, let's start a nonprofit. And that's how we ended up there.
Famous last word.
Yeah, exactly. So,
how long did that process take?
To get the nonprofit, actually? A long time. Because we didn't even know what we were doing, really. I mean, I literally bought a book called Nonprofit for Dummies,
Yep.
Starting Nonprofits for Dummies.
That's a great book. I love it. It explains everything.
And just kind of flipped through it, and then the other thing that's kind of a subsidiary of it, I actually was in a pretty bad car accident like right after we formed the executive board of this organization. So it was actually December of 2015.
Maybe 2014. Yeah.
December of 2014 that we received the actual yes from IRS that we fit the qualifications. And when it came down to it, we ultimately hired a lawyer that knows how to deal with this stuff to apply for us, and we paid them money to do it because we couldn't. I mean, we were trying so hard to figure out what's the right information, and fill out this paperwork and get all of these people's signatures, and we didn't know what we were doing. And so we just hired somebody to help us with it, and that got it done. And so then because we'd already been kind of in development, because the Downtown Farmers Market actually started in 2012. So it took us two full years to get the nonprofit status stuff up and running. Or over 2.5 years. But we had already talked to so many people about grant writing and people that wanted to, give donations, foundations that wanted to help us out with small stuff at that point, that 2015 kicked us off immediately. Immediately when we stepped into 2015, we received a very large grant and were able to move forward like a true nonprofit corporation. But even then, I mean, the next steps of how do you go from ultimately an organization that's kind of like a group of people, it's very grassroots, it's a garden club, maybe let's even call it. How do we go from that to not just a group that has nonprofit status, but an actual nonprofit corporation, which is completely different as well.
And so you begin getting grants, you begin because you've had the Tom Garden facility for a long time, the Tom Graham rather.
We got it pretty quick after we formed the actual group, the Grow Local South Texas, and the board and all of that. That happened in March of 2013, and then in April of 2013, we started talking to the neighbors in that neighborhood about that park and what we had hoped to do with it. And then in August of 2013, we spent our first big funds out there and built a fence and started the programming out there. We already were up and running. I mean, we have done we've almost done everything backwards. We're just kind of those kind of people that are like, well, let's just do it. Let's just figure out how to do it, and we're just going to start doing it, and we're going to ask for community support, and then we'll go from there. And I mean, that's the truth about every single Wednesday, the first year and into the second year, I always said, this is a community supported project. If the community supports it, we will keep working for it, and we will keep trying to figure out how to make it happen. And all along the way, the community has said yes, keep going, be persistent, we will follow, keep going. And then, of course, we've been able to go out and ask for other bigger funds, so that it's not always on the backs of members or whatever. And
you've got a lot of support out of Tom Graham, don't you?
We do have quite a few people that come out on a regular basis. We've got it's grown a lot. We've got a lot. That's truly, it doesn't have a very strong revenue stream like the farmers market does. I was actually thinking about this last night. The farmers market can pay its own bills just by the fact that it charges vendors to be at the market, and it can get sponsors easily because people's names are out of it pretty easily. But the garden, really, its only natural revenue stream is a little bit of produce. We're taking in maybe $150 a week on produce. But the goal of that garden isn't to grow produce, although it's needed at the farmers market. And so, of course, yes, we take it and we take things that are interesting and different and teach with it. But the goal of that garden is primarily education, because we're a education charity. So what it does really is it creates a larger opportunity for all kinds of funding to come into. So it truly does have a big revenue stream, actually.
Yeah.
And that's the thing that's interesting in terms of this whole nonprofit as we're going into and learning and researching nonprofits and everything is they're up to 20 years ago, the talk of a nonprofit acting like a business with revenue streams and things like that was unheard of. I mean, it was like unethical or irresponsible or whatever. And so now with 20 years of kind of the new climate culture that we live in, people want their nonprofits to be able to make their own funds.
Yeah, self-supporting.
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so we as an organization have worked very hard to figure out how to do it that way, like not overstep what we can do. Because if we're trying to teach small businesses to be sustainable, and we are, that's a part of what our model of our organization, we as an organization have to also be sustainable as well.
Sure. Cool. Your educational background is?
Yes, well, and that's the thing, and you mentioned earlier, we were talking about we get lots of media and press and stuff like that, but I'm a communications major. So communications as my primary education, writing even, I was a writing student. I actually went to A&M College Station when I left out of high school and went off, and I was an English major, but figured out pretty quickly that wasn't exactly, I'm not a writer. And I'm a talker. And so then when I came back down here, I went to Del Mar, graduated from Del Mar in liberal arts, but my focus was media, mass communications. But I even just from the studying of that stuff, I wasn't interested in following that profession. I wasn't interested in being in the news media as an anchor or any of that kind of stuff. And so when I then went to the next stage of education at the Texas A&M University Corpus Christi, I went through the communications studies track with public relations as my minor and my focus. And every advisor and every professor I talked to, because at that time there wasn't a public relations major, there wasn't even really a track. Even the minor was kind of just pick whatever you want, and there were a few things that matched it, but it didn't. So I really made my own way as a public relations professional, and really began to study communications, and not just how do I get into the media, but what are the communications, interpersonal communications, intercultural communications, business communications, all of that kind of stuff. And I personally believe that the best nonprofit leaders are always going to be communications folks, because they have the ability to communicate with all different kinds of community members.
Right.
And that's probably the hardest part of the job, because you have to talk to everybody and make everyone happy.
You have to tell the story. Cool. Okay. Shifting a little bit more into the kinds of writing and communication that you do. You've got, I'm just thinking in terms of internal communication, which would be, I guess, interaction with staff. You've got 3 staff members? I
have, there are 5 of us total now. Is that right? Yeah, there are 5 of us total. 4 of us are part-time. We have 1 full-time person. And so yes, internal communications is a huge part of it. But on top of 5 employees, we've got 300 volunteers.
I was going to say, I imagine you got a huge volunteer base, plus vendors and things like that you've got to communicate with. So what are some of the kind of communications that you do? How do you keep touch with, get the word out?
Okay, well, as I mentioned earlier, I'm not a writer. And that's a funny thing to say when you've got a degree in public relations, basically, because everyone immediately assumes that you're a writer, and I'm more of a communications specialist. So the first thing I did was collect writers all around me. So I've got several staff members that are good writers, and a volunteer executive board member who's been a part of this from the very beginning. Is an excellent writer as well. So of course we do a lot of writing, but we try really hard. We haven't really gone in the very strong direction of like large blog writing and stuff like that. And that may just be a matter of us not having the manpower or the time yet to do that.
I could pause this if you need to take it. So.
Oh, you know what? I probably do need to take it because that's my 11:30 appointment.